No, pero ahí está bien. O sea, si hubieras visto la otra vez que lo hicieron. Pues si no, entonces
Yo creo que es mejor allá para verlo.
Sí, mejor nos sentamos acá, entonces.
Sí.
Y ahí estamos. Sí. Exacto.
Sí, nos lo traemos, ¿no? Mejor.
Okay. So Dan, thank you very much for your time. You can hear us? Hello,
Hi.
Dan. Can you hear us? Can you hear us, Dan? No, creo que ahora ya no.
Can I hear it?
Ah, okay, you can hear us. Great. So, we're going to start. Buenas tardes a todos. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí, por estar en este momento. El profesor Daniel Garber, que es profesor de la Universidad de Princeton, nos va a presentar un trabajo que lleva por título We Desire to Form a Model of Human Nature, Spinoza on Becoming a More Perfect Self, y que podemos traducir como deseamos formar un modelo de naturaleza humana, Spinoza en ser más perfectos. Sí, entonces, él va a hacer la presentación aquí por PowerPoint. En cada una de las transparencias está también la traducción al español de los textos que él va a estar leyendo. Y pues cuando termine, ¿no? Será una exposición de unos 30 a 40 minutos, entonces pasamos a la serie de preguntas y respuestas. Aquí tenemos todo el apoyo del equipo, pues para poder hacer las traducciones y todo lo que se necesite. Pues muchísimas gracias por estar aquí. And so, Dan, thank you very much for your time and all your support in this conferences. So, go ahead, and we are here hearing you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I can begin now?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much for inviting me It's a great pleasure to be speaking with you. I would much rather be with you in the hall in Mexico, but unfortunately that was not possible. In the preface to part 4 of his Ethics, Spinoza writes that, and this is the first on the slide, we desire to form an idea of man as it were a model of human nature, which we may look to. Spinoza's idea of a model of human nature that can guide us as we lead our lives has attracted a great deal of attention among recent commentators. So far as I can see, the attention has been almost exclusively on the question of what exactly the idea of human nature in question is, and whether it is indeed something that we, as finite human beings, can genuinely attain. But my interest in this essay is a bit different. The formulation of this idea in the preface to Ethics 4, Spinoza writes that we desire to form an idea of man. That has always seemed a bit strange to me. Why desire? Desire is a very important concept in Spinoza's thought. Along with joy, laetitia, and sadness, justitia, desire, cupiditas, is one of the 3 primary affects. Desire has a very definite meaning in Spinoza's philosophical vocabulary. As we shall see, it is very closely connected with his Jornadas doctrine, the claim that everything thrives to persist in its existence. It is hard to believe that the word was not chosen very deliberately. But why? That's the question I would like to explore in this essay. It will, I hope, reveal some interesting perspectives on Spinoza's project in the Ethics. I'd like to begin by putting this curious sentence into the context in which Spinoza wrote it. In part 4 of the Ethic, which Spinoza entitles Of Human Bondage, he deals with the way the affects constrain us. Then in part 5, on human freedom, Spinoza discusses how we can liberate ourselves from the affects. But before entering into this project, Spinoza chooses to, quote, say a few words first on the perfection and imperfection, on good and evil. This is the context in which the discussion of the model of human nature will eventually arise. It is worth our while, though, to set out what Spinoza has to say about perfection and the good with some care before we turn to the question of the model of human nature. Spinoza begins the preface with an example. Consider someone who wants to build a house. Normally, when engaging in an activity like that, people have a plan for what they want to make, whether it be on paper or in their heads. They will decide what materials to use, be it lumber or brick or stone, how many doors and windows they want, what kind of roof they want to put on it, and so on. When the construction is finished, and the house has all of the features that the builder had planned to put into the house, then the house can be said to be perfect. But for Spinoza, perfectus, most often translated as perfect, is the past perfect participle of perficere, to complete. And so, in Latin, the adjective perfectus would literally mean completed. Spinoza writes, If someone sees a work which I suppose to be not yet completed, and knows that the purpose of the author of that work is to build a house, he will say that it is imperfect. On the other hand, he will call it perfect as soon as he sees that the work has been carried through to the end which its author has decided to give it. But suppose that we see some sort of construction going on, and we don't have access to the builder's plans. Then Spinoza remarks, we, quote, will, of course, not be able to know whether that work is perfect or imperfect. That's to say, complete or incomplete. And this, Spinoza observes, seems to have been the original meaning of perfect, that is, completed. In order to apply the term perfect to a given thing, we need to know that it is a thing being formed in accordance with a particular plan and what that plan is. Spinoza then notes how the term comes to be used in somewhat looser ways. First, he notes, people come to frame for themselves ideas of what a given sort of thing should be like, and apply the word perfect and imperfect to things that correspond or fail to correspond to their conception of what those kinds of things should be like, even if the plans in the mind of the person actually constructing them are quite different. And this is what he writes. But after men began to form universal ideas and devise models of houses, buildings, towers, etc., and to prefer some models of things to others, it came about that each one called perfect what he saw agreed with the universal idea he had formed of this kind of thing, and imperfect what he saw agreed less with the model he had conceived, even though its maker thought he had entirely finished it. But the mistake goes beyond the judgments we make about human artifacts, such as buildings. Spinoza then notes the way in which people extend notions of perfection and imperfection to things that are not the result of any human activity. Nor does there, and I'm quoting, nor does there seem to be any other reason why men also commonly call perfect or imperfect natural things, which have not been made by human hand, for they are accustomed to form universal ideas of natural things as much as they do of artificial ones, like buildings or houses. They regard these universal ideas as models of things, and believe that nature, which they think does nothing except for the sake of some end, looks to them and sets them before itself as models. So when they see something happen in nature which does not agree with the model they have conceived of this kind of thing, they believe that nature itself has failed or sinned and left the thing imperfect. In just the way that the builder of the house has a plan in mind when constructing the house, the assumption is that nature itself has in mind a plan or model, an exemplar when it comes to many things. One comes to assume that there are such exemplars for a wide variety of things we see in nature, animals, plants, sunsets, which, if not exactly exemplified in created things, can be called imperfect. Because of our ordinary experience of animals in the world, for example, we come to think that there is a model or exemplar behind the creation of individual animals, say dogs. When a given dog has all of the elements in the universal model or exemplar of the dog, a head, a tail, 2 ears, 4 legs, etc., then it is said to be perfect. But if it deviates from this model, say that it is born with 3 legs rather than 4, then it is said to be imperfect. However, Spinoza argues, there are no such plans for God or nature to consult when creating things. Referring back to the argument against final causes in nature that he had given in the appendix to Ethics 1, Spinoza reminds us that, quote, nature does nothing on account of an end. He continues, the eternal, I'm sorry, it's the previous slide. The eternal, well, I'm not sure that I have this slide, I'm sorry. In any case, the quotation is, the eternal and infinite being. Yeah, this is right. The eternal and infinite being we call God or nature acts from the same necessity from which he exists. For we have shown that the necessity of nature from which he acts is the same as that from which he exists. The reason, therefore, or cause why God or nature acts, and the reason why he exists, are one and the same. As he exists for the sake of no end, he also acts for the sake of no end. Rather, he has no principle or end of existence, so he has none of it. There is no exemplar that God uses to create the dog. And so, in particular, natural things are not produced in accordance with any model or exemplar. They just are, whatever they are, what follows necessarily from the divine nature. And as a consequence, there is no standard of complete or incomplete against which one can claim that a given natural thing is perfect or imperfect. And so Spinoza writes that men are accustomed to call natural things perfect or imperfect more from prejudice than from true knowledge of those things. The prejudice in question is, of course, the prejudice that nature has a model, in accordance with which natural things can be determined to be complete or incomplete. And so Spinoza writes, perfection and imperfection, therefore, are only modes of thinking, that is, notions we are accustomed to fashion, because we compare individuals of the same species or genus to one another. That is why I said above that by reality and perfection, I understand the same thing. The reference to Ethics Part 2, Definition 6 is very important here. And this is the definition. By reality and perfection, I understand the same thing. To be real, to really exist, is to follow necessarily from the divine nature. As Spinoza writes in Ethics 1, Proposition 16, cited above in the passage that I quoted from the preface, from the necessity of the divine nature, there must follow infinitely many things in infinitely many ways. And everything that follows from the divine nature is in itself complete, that is perfect. It can only be considered incomplete or imperfect insofar as it is relative to a plan that someone has framed in connection with producing something artificial. The lumber that makes up a house under construction is perfect and complete in itself. As following from the necessity from the divine nature. The fact that the construction in progress lacks a roof, say, makes it imperfect and incomplete, but only relative to the plans that the builder had for the house he wanted to build. Spinoza acknowledges that we also talk about some things that we find in nature, animals, plants, etc., as imperfect with respect to others. But he claims this is not warranted. Insofar as we attribute something to them that involves negation, like a limit, an end, a lack of power, etc., we call them imperfect because they do not affect our mind as much as those we call perfect, and not because something is lacking in them, which is theirs, or because nature has sinned. Nature does not sin for Spinoza. Natural things never lack what they are supposed to have. And continuing on the slide, for nothing belongs to the nature of anything except what follows from the necessity of the nature of the efficient cause. And that, of course, is God. And whatever follows from the necessity of the nature of the efficient cause happens necessarily. That is to say, insofar as everything follows with necessity from the divine nature, according to Ethics 1, Proposition 16, everything is necessary and nothing could have had anything more or less than it actually has. Everything that is real is complete. Everything that is real is therefore perfect. Nature does not sin. Now, even though Spinoza holds that in a sense, everything is perfect as it is, and that there is no room for imperfection in the natural world, he is also happy to note that some things are more or less real, and thus more or less excellent, or more or less perfect than other things. For example, consider the discussion of the human mind in Ethics 2, Proposition 13, Scholium. In Ethics 2, Proposition 13, if you remember, Spinoza establishes that the human mind is the idea of the human body. However, he notes, quote, the things we have shown so far are so completely general and do not pertain to more to man than to other individuals, all of which, though in different degrees, are nevertheless animate. So in order to understand the human mind, we must understand the body of which it is an idea. And he writes, we cannot deny that ideas differ among themselves as the objects themselves do, and that one is more excellent than the other, and contains more reality, just as the object of one is more excellent than the object of the other, and contains more reality. And so to determine what is the difference between the human mind and the others, and how it surpasses them, it is necessary for us, as we have said, to know the nature of the object of the human body. And so what he does is he goes on at that point to give a little bit of physics and to talk about the physical differences between different bodies. There are then, though, the implication in this passage is that there are different degrees of reality and, as a consequence, different degrees of perfection, since by reality and perfection, Spinoza understands the same thing. As one commentator put it, for Spinoza, though, quote, nothing that is real is imperfect. After finishing the discussion of the perfection, so nothing that comes from God is imperfect, even though some of the things that come from God are more perfect than others, but none of them is, strictly speaking, imperfect. After finishing the discussion of perfection and imperfection of things, Spinoza adds a few words extending the conclusion he had drawn about perfection and imperfection to good and evil. As far as good and evil are concerned, they also indicate nothing positive in things considered in themselves, nor are they anything other than modes of thinking or notions we form because we compare things to one another. A kind of confirmation of this comes about from the observation that the same things that can be good in one context are bad in another, or indifferent in a third. Let me see. Yeah, it's on the same slide. For one and the same thing can, at the same time, be good and bad, and also indifferent. For example, music is good for one who is melancholy, bad for one who is mourning, and neither good nor bad for one who is deaf. Now, what Spinoza says about other things in nature is true of us as well. Each of us is a being that follows necessarily from the divine nature. And as such, from the perspective of the divine nature, we have not been formed in accordance with some model or exemplar of the divine intellect. In our reality, each of us is complete. In our being, each of which is in this sense perfect. Nature does not sin, and nature does not leave anything incomplete. But even so, there seems to be no reason why we couldn't become more perfect still. Now, up until this point in the preface to Ethics 4, Spinoza has been discussing the use of models, exemplars, in grounding the notions of perfect and imperfect, good and evil. These models play an important role when we are talking about artificial things, things that are made deliberately by human beings, say, like houses. But Spinoza argues, in the natural world there are no such models. All natural things are perfect in themselves, and that would seem to include us. It is at this point that Spinoza introduces the idea of a model of human nature. And let me quote again the passage with which I began. But though this is so, that's to say, but though good and evil indicate nothing positive in things, still we must retain these words, good and evil. For because we desire to form an idea of man, as it were a model of human nature, which we may look to, it will be useful for us to retain these same words with the meaning I have indicated. Now, there's more on the slide that I'm not reading, but I may come back to that later. Note here that the model in question is something that we desire to form. It is something that we form. It is not something in God's mind. It is something that we desire to form, that we desire to form. In this respect, it is like the builder's model for his house. The builder formulates the model, decides how many rooms, where the doors and windows are to go, what kind of roof he wants to add, and so on. Spinoza is definitely not making the mistake of thinking that there is a model of human nature after which we are created. As with a dog born with only 3 legs, we are, in a sense, perfect as we are. However, even so, we desire to form a model of human nature that we can use as a guide in our lives. We are like the builder in that way, except our construction project is not something outside of ourselves. It is ourselves that we want to construct, or perhaps reconstruct. Perhaps we might think of the project as a kind of home improvement project. We already exist, but we've come to be unhappy with ourselves as we are and want to renovate some portions of an existing me. This model will be used as a guide as we navigate through life, trying to make choices that bring us closer to the model of human nature that we have formed, and to avoid making choices that take us further away from that model. This is a bit paradoxical, I grant. We are perfect with respect to God, but yet we desire to become more perfect still, more perfect than the perfect that we are already. Why does Spinoza say, though, that we desire to form such a model? And what motivates us to choose that which is good, that is, that which brings us closer to the model, and to avoid that which is evil, that is, that which takes us farther from the model? To probe these issues, we have to turn to Spinoza's account of desire. Spinoza's account of desire is closely connected with his account of conatus, the claim that everything strives toward persevering in its being. Two important propositions in that connection are these. Each thing, insofar as it can, quantum in se est, strives to persevere in its being. And Ethics 3, Proposition 9, both insofar as the mind has clear and distinct ideas, and insofar as it has confused ideas, it strives for an indefinite duration to persevere in its being and is conscious of the striving it has. Desire comes up in the scholium to this second proposition, to Proposition 9. When this striving is related only to the mind, it is called will, voluntas. But when it is related to the mind and body together, it is called appetite, appetitus. This appetite, therefore, is nothing but the very essence of man, from whose nature there necessarily follow those things that promote his preservation. And so man is determined to do these things. Between appetite and desire, cupiditas, there is no difference, except that desire is generally related to men insofar as they are conscious of their appetite. So desire can be defined as appetite together with the consciousness of the appetite. It's important here, man is determined to do those things that promote his preservation. In this passage, Spinoza links will, mind, and appetite with one another, and with the striving, or conatus, a thing has to persevere in its being. On Spinoza's view, we are all determined by our makeup to strive to persevere in our being. When this striving is related to mind and body, it's appetite. When the appetite is conscious, that is, when the striving is conscious and related to both mind and body, then it is desire. Desire then just is the striving toward self-preservation. But Spinoza holds the same striving is also the essence of things. He writes, the striving by which each thing strives to persevere in its being is nothing but the actual essence of things. And similarly, in Proposition 9, Scholium, Spinoza asserts that appetite, which he had identified earlier in the Scholium with the striving to persevere in its existence, is nothing but the very essence of man, from whose nature there necessarily follow those things that promote his preservation. And the Scholium continues. And so man is determined to do those things, that is, the things that promote his preservation. For example, when I reach out and grab an apple, that's a direct result, Spinoza is asserting here. It's a direct result of my striving for self-preservation. Insofar as this striving is my essence, then grabbing the apple is a consequence of my essence. And insofar as I am conscious of it, I can be said to desire the apple. And so Spinoza will say in the Appendix to Ethics 4, his definitions of the affects, desire is man's very essence, insofar as it is conceived to be determined from one or another of its affections to do something. Note here the role that experience can play in directing the striving for self-preservation to one or another action, as in the case of grabbing the apple. In the definitions of the affects appended to Ethics 3, in the definition of desire, Spinoza speaks of the affections of the essence as determining us to do something. In his explanation for that definition, Spinoza, it's the same slide. Spinoza writes that, it isn't, I'm sorry, there may be a mistake there, excuse me. In any case, in the explanation of the definition, he writes that by an affection of a human essence, we understand any state of that essence, whether it is innate or has come from the outside, whether it is conceived through the attribute of thought alone, or through the attribute of extension alone, or is referred both to once. Remember that the affections of an individual, of an essence, determines us to do something. What is an affection now? The affection to which Spinoza is referring here seems to me to be quite clearly to be the external impingements on the body, as he discusses in Ethics 2, Proposition 23. Here it is. To which Spinoza refers in the explanation of this definition in the appendix. In that same proposition, Spinoza suggests that it is only through external impingements on the body that we become aware, conscious of both bodies and ourselves. So the affections or external impingements, including, of course, experience, is what can trigger the striving and direct it toward a particular action. Desire is man's very essence, insofar as it is conceived to be determined from one or another of its affections to do something. It is, one might suppose, because I actually, to bring this down to concrete things, it is, one might suppose, because I actually see the apple, that my striving for self-preservation is triggered and directed to do something, in particular, to reach out and grab the apple and eat it. And this way, my grabbing out, my desire for the apple, which in turn leads me to the action of going out and picking up the apple and eating it, is a manifestation of my conatus for self-preservation. And finally, at the end of Ethics 3, Proposition 9, Scholium, Spinoza adds, from all this then, it is clear that we neither strive for nor will, neither want nor desire anything because we judge it to be good. On the contrary, we judge something to be good because we strive for it, want it, and desire it. Considering something good is not a cause of our desiring it. We consider something good precisely because we desire it. Okay, this is a bit about what desire means for Spinoza, how it's connected with the conatus for self-preservation. And there's a great deal more that one can say about desire as well as will and appetite in Spinoza. There's a very large literature on that. But at this point, we can turn back to the text that we're trying to explicate. We desire to form an idea of human nature. One of the things that we all desire as human beings is to become more perfect. The desire to become more perfect is itself part of our nature, insofar as we have reason, which we presumably all do, at least to some degree. Since reason demands nothing contrary to nature, it demands that everyone love himself, seek his own advantage, which is really useful to him, want what will really lead men to greater perfection, and absolutely that everyone should strive to preserve his own being as far as he can. This indeed is as necessarily true as that the whole is greater than its part. It's important for Spinoza that the kind of perfection that we're talking about is human perfection. Now, we might become more perfect by becoming a being of a different kind altogether, like a clam desiring to become a fish, or a fish become a whale, or Pinocchio deciding to become a real boy. We might want to become more perfect by becoming angels, for example, a different kind of being, a kind of being more perfect than us. But that's not what Spinoza has in mind. After articulating our desire to form a model of human nature in the preface of Ethics 4, he writes, when I say that someone passes from a lesser to a greater perfection, and the opposite, I do not understand that he has changed from one essence or form to another. For example, a horse is destroyed as much if it is changed into a man as if it is changed into an insect. Rather, we conceive of that his power of acting, insofar as it is understood through his nature, is increased or diminished through that nature that he had before. What we want is to become a more perfect person. To become more perfect as a human being is to have more power, but still to remain human. If angels are more powerful than we are, and thus have a higher perfection than we do, it is not in our nature to strive to become them. What I desire is to become a better and stronger and more perfect human. It is for this reason that I desire to undertake the project of self-reconstruction that I am engaged in. And because we desire to become more perfect, because we want to engage in the project of reconstructing ourselves, of building a more perfect self, we desire to form a model of human nature. We desire to form something that we can use as a guide to life, a standard that tells us what we should do, that which will bring us closer to the model, and what we shouldn't do, that which will lead us away from the model. Since we desire to form the model, we desire to do the one and avoid the other. We desire to do that which will bring us closer to the model and avoid doing that which will take us further from the model. That is, we desire to be as much like the model as we can be. That is what it means to take something as a model, as an exemplar. To approach the model is presumably to become more perfect than we are now, in the sense that we talked about earlier. We desire to form an idea of man, as it were, a model of human nature that we may look to. When Spinoza says this, then, he is claiming that it follows from our essence, from the striving towards self-preservation, that we strive to form such an idea or model of human nature. He's also claiming that we do so consciously. We are explicitly aware of the fact that we strive to form such an idea. Furthermore, it isn't just you or me or Benedictus Spinoza who has this striving, but it's all of us, presumably all humans. We desire, cupimus. Not everything has such a desire. Stones, insofar as they have mind, which for Spinoza they would seem to, don't have such desires. And I think that Spinoza doesn't mean to suggest that other animals, horses, for example, have a desire to form an idea of human nature, nor do they even have a desire to form an idea of equine nature, one would suppose. But the desire to form an idea of human nature is something that is part of the perfection of human minds, and in a parallel way, of course, their bodies. Earlier, I talked about how desire can be triggered by experience. In the case of my desire for an apple, it is the sight of the apple that can be said to trigger my desire for it, to direct the striving that I have for self-preservation toward the action of reaching out for the apple. But what is the experience that triggers the desire to frame a model of human nature that I can use to guide my behavior? Now, it is possible that Spinoza thought that we don't need a trigger in this case, and that our nature, that is our conatus for self-preservation, is such that by its own nature it determines us to strive to articulate a model of human nature and use it as a guide of life. But I suspect that experience does play a role here. But what experience? Here I would like to turn to the opening of the Tractatus de Intellectus Emendatione. This text is one of the most personal passages in Spinoza's writings, where he appears to be speaking to the reader from the heart. sharing the story of how he came to his philosophy as a young man. But it is also an example of how each of us might come to the desire to search for a model of human nature that we might use as a guide in life. At the very beginning of the Tractatus De Intellectus Immentatione, Spinoza speaks with his experience of the world and his disappointment with life as he finds it. He writes, "After experience had taught me that all the things which regularly occur in ordinary life are empty and futile, and I saw that all the things which were the cause or object of my fear had nothing of good or bad in themselves, except insofar as my mind was moved by them, I resolved at last to try to find out whether there was anything which would be the true good, capable of communicating itself, and which alone would affect the mind, all others being rejected. Whether there was something which once found and acquired would continuously give me the greatest joy to eternity." It is his dissatisfaction with what he had found in ordinary life that moved Spinoza to resolve to search for something better, ultimately a true good. Think of the builder now before he resolved to build a house. One might imagine that the inconveniences of life without a shelter, or in a natural shelter like a cave, or even in his present dwelling, might cause him to think about building a house. Using language that Spinoza would adopt later in life, just as the present experience of the builder might lead him to have a desire to build a house, the general dissatisfaction with life, as one finds it, might cause Spinoza to desire something better, a genuine good toward which he could strive. Spinoza begins his inquiry by considering some common conceptions of the highest good. Most things which present themselves in life, and which, to judge from their actions, men think to be the highest good, may be reduced to these three: wealth, honor, and sensual pleasure. The mind is so distracted by these three that it cannot give the slightest thought to any other good. The question Spinoza asks himself for each of these candidates is this: is this a genuine good that I should seek? And should I seek to become the kind of person who seeks such a good? In this way, Spinoza's search for the highest good evolves seamlessly into a somewhat different kind of search, a search for the kind of person that he should seek to become. Spinoza goes one by one through these three candidates for the highest good, rejecting them one by one. This inquiry eventually leads us to see that man conceives a nature, a human nature much stronger and more enduring than his own, and at the same time sees that nothing prevents his acquiring such a nature. Because of this vision of what he could be, he is spurred to seek means that will lead him to such a perfection. Because he desires to have such a nature, quote, whatever can be a means to his attaining it is called a true good. In this way, it is his dissatisfaction with life and the realization that he could be more perfect, that is, stronger, that leads Spinoza to desire to frame a conception of human nature that can serve as a model for his life. And one might suppose what moves Spinoza in this passage is something that moves us all as human beings. As human beings, we can all be moved by the dissatisfaction of our lives to desire to become more perfect and to desire to understand what will bring us to that more perfect state. That desire, which springs from our essence, our striving to persist in our existence, is a desire to form an idea of man as it were a model of human nature that we may look to as we turn away from the lives that we have led and undertake the task of rebuilding ourselves and reforming our lives. And let me end with a few final thoughts. There's a lot more that one might and perhaps should say at this point about the project that Spinoza proposes. But I'm going to end with a few words about issues that I'm not going to discuss in this paper. Firstly, even if we all agree in desiring to form a model of human nature, will we all come to agree on the same model? The person who has great wealth and enjoys it, or who is basking in the glory of the admiration of others, or has a surfeit of sensual pleasure, may be perfectly happy with what they have, and may not be motivated to look any further than that for their model of human nature. The hedonist, for example, may desire to form a model of human nature and think that he's already found it. How can we say that he's wrong? This is, I think, a real issue, although I'm not going to talk about how to resolve it now. But secondly, it is generally agreed that Spinoza, at least, believes that there is a single model of human nature that we all do desire, or perhaps all should desire, to frame. But what exactly is that model? And why does he think that we should all aim to satisfy it? And even if he holds such a view, Spinoza would have to admit that everyone doesn't always agree about what the correct model of human nature is. Why, might we ask, does he think that we should aim for one particular model? And I think a lot of the discussion about this passage and the model of human nature has been actually directed at exactly that question. What does he think the model is? And why does he think that we should all adopt it? And finally, when we examine the model of human nature that Spinoza thinks we should all aim for, does he think that it is possible for human beings to actually attain it? In the version of the model that he presents in the treatise on the emendation of the intellect, he seems to think that we can all attain it. Quote, man conceives a human nature much stronger and more enduring than his own, and at the same time sees that nothing prevents his acquiring such a nature. But does he still believe that when he wrote the Ethics? And does it matter to the project whether or not one can actually succeed in exemplifying the ideal model of human nature and acquiring the highest perfection that we're capable of? These are further questions for another day. But I would like to end with a few words about how focusing on our desire to form the idea of a model of human nature to which we can aspire, and the other issues that I've been contemplating in this essay, may lead us to an interesting rethinking of Spinoza's project in the Ethics. What would Spinoza's Ethics look like if we considered the preface of Ethics 4 as the true beginning of an ethics? That is, the true beginning of the project of figuring out how we, as human beings, should be leading our lives. Read in this way, then, parts 1, 2, and 3 of the Ethics emerge simply as preliminaries to Spinoza's main project. In part 1, Spinoza could then be read as setting out the larger metaphysical framework in which he works. Parts 2 and 3 could be read as setting out the nature of the human being and some of the important features of the makeup of the human body and mind. On this reading, then, after the preliminaries of the first 3 parts of the Ethics, in the preface of part 4, then, Spinoza sets out what it is that he will do in the rest of the text. In this, now read as the heart of what I'm proposing, as the heart of the Ethics, Spinoza would show us how we strive to rebuild ourselves and become more perfect. The project begins, of course, by forming a plan for improving ourselves and becoming more perfect. We desire to form an idea of man, as it were, a model of human nature, which we may look to, as a guide to what we should do and what we shouldn't. On this reading of the Ethics, what Spinoza is showing us is where we desire to go and how we desire to get there. It's important to realize that this is not a project that we do by choice. In Spinoza's necessitarian world, nothing is by choice at root. The project is one that follows from our very nature. We desire the striving for persisting in our existence, necessary to us as individuals and as human beings, demands that we do it, demands that we seek greater and greater perfection. Spinoza is not exhorting us to undertake the project. He is simply explaining, in a sense, that this is the project that we, as human beings, are compelled to undertake. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much, Dan. Can you hear us?
Yes. Shall I stop the sharing of the,
Yes, if you like.
okay?
So we are going to pass to the question and answers. ¿Está apagado este también?
I'm not hearing you.
So Dan, for just a minute, if you can mute your microphone.
Do you want me to mute mine?
Yes, just for a minute, just to check it. Okay.
Hey, Luis, I think it would work better if people spoke directly into the computer microphone rather than the remote microphone. Okay.
Luis, perhaps oh, just a moment. Yes, yes, I can. It is much clearer. It is much clearer when somebody actually speaks into the computer microphone. Um, can I ask you to actually repeat it into the other to the microphone in the computer because it's very difficult. The sound comes out very distorted. That's much better. That's much better. Thank you. Right. Yep. There are a lot of questions there. There are a lot of questions there, but they're very good questions. What is the power to act? And I think in general, the power to act for Spinoza is simply going to be the ability to preserve one's own existence. That to increase the power is to increase our ability to preserve our own existence. Is this something that belongs to everything, to species, or to individuals? Well, I would say all three, but in different ways, I suspect. Each of us, of course, does have a power. Your power to preserve yourself may be more than mine, but, of the same kind. Uh, as human beings, we do share certain things that everything strives to preserve itself. And one can say that in a certain sense, everything, has a kind of volition and a kind of appetite, in the way in which Spinoza defines those terms in terms of the conatus and Ethics 3, Proposition 9, Scholium. But I do think that there is something special about us, something that we share as human beings. And I think it probably, if Spinoza was pressed, would come to the fact that that our bodies have something in common with one another, by virtue of which um, we are led to preserve ourselves in certain characteristic ways. I think he does think that human beings, unlike clams or fish, have something called reason, um, which which is partly what leads us to want to um, change ourselves in such a way that we will work with one another, that we will strive for a certain kind of perfection that other kinds of bodies with minds don't. So there is something, I think, specifically human about this idea that we desire to form an idea of human nature that you don't find, for example, in horses or dogs or clams. And so there is something like that. Now, is this something that he tells us is that we should do? Is this a kind of um, argument about how it is that we ought to behave? Is there that kind of ought underneath Spinoza's language? Well, sometimes there appears to be. But if everything is necessary, part of I think looking at the project of the ethics in the way in which I'm suggesting um, allows us to understand the way in which it's an interesting project, even if everything is necessary, and even if there is no hidden ought in there. He, in a certain sense, is not telling us what we should do, but explaining what it is that we do. We do desire to form this. We do desire to become more perfect, to become more powerful. And that is something that is important to us as human beings, although it's also important to us individually. Hello, very nice to see you. Well, first of all, um, just where the awareness comes from. I should say something about that. It comes directly out of Proposition 9, Part 3. Insofar as the mind has clear and distinct ideas, blah, 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 it strives for an indefinite duration to persevere in its being and is conscious of this striving. So, um, desire, as opposed to appetite or volition, involves consciousness for Spinoza. Um, and I'm not sure why you need. No, what he says is, that desire can be defined as appetite together with consciousness of the appetite. And I'm not sure why what the consciousness is doing there. And I know that you're going to be talking about consciousness, and maybe you can explain why it is that consciousness is particularly important for desire. Um, in the passages that I'm looking at, we desire to form um, an idea of human nature and so on. Because it's desire, it necessarily involves consciousness, the way in which he defines desire. But I'm not really sure what role the consciousness actually plays in that. So the answer is, in a certain sense, I don't really know what the consciousness is doing there. What's important is that there is a volition, an appetite to do that, and that by virtue of being human, we have that, and that it comes directly, it's a direct expression of the conatus for self-preservation. When I reach for an apple to eat, that's also an expression of the conatus for self-preservation. But does it matter whether I'm doing that consciously or not? Right, right, right. Oh, um, that's a good question. Um, you think people could people could be striving um, to form that even if they weren't conscious that that's what they were doing in life? How that would be different? That's a really good question. I don't really know. Um, but I'll certainly give it some thought. And if you can figure out, I, I would be happy to learn. Hello, Yitzhak. Nice to see you. I am right. I am so sorry not to be there. Right, right. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. As opposed to the summum bonum. I think in Spinoza's mind, those two are really closely connected. And you can see it closely connected in the opening passage of the Tractatus de Intellectus Emendatione, because he does move back and forth. What is the highest good that I should be um, uh, going for it? And what kind of person is it that I am to be? What kind of, really, I think the ethical question for Spinoza is what kind of life, and not only for Spinoza, but for many others as well, before Kant, before Hume, is not, how do we solve the trolley problem? Or what is permitted and what is obligatory? But really, what kind of a life should we as human beings be leading? And that, I think, for him is, you know, deeply connected with the summum bonum in that passage at the beginning of the treatise on the emendation of the intellect. And I will, by the way, make an observation, something that I have been that occurred to me, almost from the first time that I read the treatise on the emendation of the intellect, which is why begin? If it is about logic and epistemology and truth and things like that, why begin with that particular opening? And I think that that the treatise on the emendation of the intellect was originally started as an exposition of his entire philosophy, you know, the work that put it all together. And I think that in a certain sense, this question, which in the ethics doesn't come up into the preface to Ethics 4, is really, in a certain way, the motivating question in his philosophy. And that, even metaphysical part and the physical part about, and the psychological part are, in a certain sense, to addressing what he takes to be the real central ethical question, which in the ethics he doesn't get to until ethics 4 and 5. Yeah, 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 yeah. No, that's that. uh, can I answer? Are you done? Yeah, there are there are a number of interesting things to sort of say about that. First of all, um, if there is, a sort of answer to what we should all be striving for. First of all, it's different for us than, say, for a horse. It has something to do with the kind of, there is something. Uh, Spinoza obviously has some ambivalence, great ambivalence about universals. When you look at the first Scholium Ethics 240, he uses, human being and horse, as as examples of, there is no such universal. But on the other hand, human beings as modes of extension do have something in common with one another. And one can say that by virtue of that, the goal to which they should each be, that we should all be as human beings striving, should be the same. And that there shouldn't be, that if somebody, stops at wealth or pleasure or something like that, then they have inadequate ideas. But on the other hand, this is in tension, I think, with um, another part of the preface to Ethics 4, which is that, there is no sort of Platonic universal that God uses when building human beings. It would seem that if there were a single, model, then that would undermine what it is that he says. When he says, everything is in itself perfect, insofar as it follows from necessity from the divine nature. And there is no model in the way in which, for the builder building a house, there is a model that one can use. So there would be an objective perfection and imperfection. But maybe that's just a tension in Spinoza's thought. But the things it does what you're suggesting is, but if you take your suggestion, which is I think a very reasonable reading of Spinoza, if you take it to that level, to that conclusion, then it may be in tension with what it is that he says about archetypes. But I'm not sure of it. Yeah. 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 The thing, I mean, but I mean, the a thing to say is that normativity is, of course, very difficult for Spinoza, given that everything is necessary. It's difficult. That I think has been one of the is always when you teach Spinoza, um, um, trying to wrestle with the idea that there are passages that obviously look like they are normative recommendations about how to behave. But on the other hand, everything is necessary. What I was suggesting at the end is what it is that he's doing is showing us how to understand ourselves and how it is that we are simply by virtue of being human beings, um, striving to, desiring to become more perfect by way of articulating a conception of human nature. And in a certain sense, this is not normative, but it turns, I think, ethics as Spinoza is perhaps practicing it. And I should say that I think that this proposal that I'm making is, in some ways, I wake up in the morning and I think this is outrageous. Nobody could possibly believe this. But it is a rather um, um, well, sort of daring way of rethinking Spinoza. But it does. The point then would be not to tell us what we should do, but to explain what it is that we as human beings do, and how it is that we as human beings are um, compelled to live in this particular ethical way. Can I make a comment to Cillian's, to something that she had said before for just a moment, um, about just a moment. It'll take me a moment to remember the comment that I was going to that I was make. No, I'm not going to remember it. I had it for a second, but I'll write her if I remember it. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. That's an interesting idea. Um, um, I don't think Spinoza would have thought so. On the other hand, uh, he perhaps should have thought so. I think that knowledge of that this really is what he's making, what he's presenting is um, an account of how it is that we do what it is that we do desire to do, and where it is that it does lead us. That is dependent upon a certain conception of human nature, which he sets out, for example, in Ethics 3. And insofar as we learn more, we can, in principle, perhaps come to think of in a slightly different way than he did. Although I'm not sure that he would admit anything like that. But now I remember what I was going to, and this is relevant to your question, or to your thought. When question that I raised at the end was, will everybody come to the same um, conception of an idea of human nature? And why wouldn't somebody who was going rich think, it's really great to be this. This is exactly what I want to be. Or somebody you know, who likes attention from other people, thinking, "Oh, this is really what I want to be, is famous." And that's what I want to be. Um, given that um, the ideal human nature is dependent upon our makeup as human beings. Um, there are going to be some human beings who are perhaps imperfect or more imperfect than we are. Those of us who are Spinoza scholars, of course, and may actually find themselves in this sort of mistaken position. But this is to say that their ideas are inadequate because there's something about them as the particular individuals that they are that that give them these inadequacies. But I'm not sure how to articulate that. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry that I can't be there with everybody next time. Goodbye.